What is up, everybody? I'm Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com. UFC 303 is in the books, and what a wild night of fights. What a crazy bunch of turn of events it really was. It was really spectacular. Uh, but I'm here to talk about Alex Pereira, Jon Jones, Pereira potentially fighting Jon Jones for the heavyweight title, and also to talk about Pereira in the pound for pound list and how that should go. If you watched the press conference for UFC 303, you might have heard Dana White and myself get into it a little bit. When Dana was talking about Jon Jones being the greatest pound for pound fighter in the world. And I don't disagree that Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all time. What Jones has done in his career has been absolutely remarkable. He's beat an unbelievable slew of fighters. He has one loss in his career, which was by disqualification, and I believe a mistake by referee Steve Mazzagatti in a fight against Matt the Hammer Hamill, a fight that Jones was about to win by knockout, and he ends up getting a loss. But Jon has fought once in the last 4+ years. That was his win in March of 2023 over Cyril Gahn to win the heavyweight championship. And so while I agree that Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all time, and if he were active now, I would have Jon Jones as my number one pound for pound fighter in the world. However, he is not active. And let me explain my criteria when I am picking who is number one pound for pound in the world. The reason that I don't have Jon on my list right now, at KevinIole.com, we have Islam Makhachev number one. The reason I don't have Jones in my top 16 at all is this. He hasn't fought since March of 2023, and he's fought once that fight in 4 years since he beat Dominic Reyes in Houston in 2020. You have to be active to be in the pound for pound list of today. I understand that Jon has an injury. He is supposed to come back in November at Madison Square Garden and fight Stipe Miocic to defend the heavyweight championship. And when Jon fights that fight, he will go back into the rankings. Presumably, if he wins, he will go back in as number one. We have to wait and see how he looks in the fight, but I would agree that if Jones looks like he normally looks, he will win the fight and he will be number one. So I rate Jones the greatest fighter of all time, and I have much love for Jon Jones as a fighter. And I think he's the best active fighter in the world when he is fighting, but he is not fighting now. And that was the point that I was trying to make to Dana at the press conference. But Dana is good on the mic. He's loud. He was talking. It was his show. And you can't really argue with him. There's other reporters that want to get the mic. I tried to make my point during the show. Couldn't do that, so I realized, okay, let's move on to other things because we have a limited amount of time there. People are on deadline. There's other fighters who are waiting to come in. Diego Lopez and Alex Pereira had to come in after Dana left the press conference, so it's not really possible. Sometimes I know you guys don't understand how the dynamics of it, and you think, that we should be battling with Dana. But, I was making my argument, and unfortunately, it went the way it did. But I'm not putting Pereira at number one either. However, we'll get into Pereira and Jones in a second. But let me also bring up why pound for pound exists now. Pound for pound started really in the 1940s when when Sugar Ray Robinson was boxing. Sugar Ray Robinson right now is regarded as the greatest boxer of all time. But in the 1940s, Joe Louis had won the heavyweight title in the late 1930s, and he was perceived to be the greatest fighter in the world. He was a war hero. He did so much for this country, and Joe Louis was considered number one in the world. But as Robinson made his rise and won the welterweight championship, reporters at that time struggled. How do we tell people how good he is in relation to Joe Louis? Of course, they're never going to fight. Robinson maxes out at 147 pounds. Joe Louis was a small heavyweight. He would basically be a cruiserweight today. He weighed in the high 190s, low 200s. So they could never fight. So the writers were trying to come up with a way to compare them, and they came up with a pound for pound list. And so it's like a video game, and you say if everything was the same, who would win these fights? So, and the all-time list, of course, Jon Jones is the man. But currently in MMA, he's not fighting. So Islam Makhachev, the UFC lightweight champion, is number one pound for pound, according to most people, including myself. So that is where that goes. But now you may have heard me also ask Dana, I said, you seem reticent to let Alex Pereira move up to heavyweight and fight Jon Jones for the heavyweight championship. And I'll tell you the truth, if I had my way, I would have Jon Jones defend against Alex Pereira in New York as opposed to Stipe Miocic. Now, I know that's tough for Stipe, and Stipe, his body of work makes him the greatest heavyweight of all time right now. But having said that, Stipe hasn't fought since 2021, since losing to Francis Ngannou. And it'll be 3.5 years by the time he fights. He's coming off a loss. It just doesn't seem right to me for Stipe just to jump back in and be able to get this championship fight when he hasn't been active at all. I know he's been ready to fight and blah, 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 but he has not fought. And, I think there were opportunities if you wanted for him to fight. But be that as it may, he is going to get that opportunity. I would like to see Pereira get it. Now, Dana's point in it, there's some validity to it. He said it's not like he's been in the light heavyweight division for years and cleaned out the division. However, he has beaten number 1 twice. He has beaten number 3, and he has beaten number 4. That is pretty incredible. And let's listen to this. Alex, since he has joined the UFC in 2001, he's not even in the UFC for 3 full years yet. He's 8-1 in the UFC, 11-2 overall. And let's just go back to UFC 276 and listen to this group of fighters that he has fought. UFC 276, KO won against Sean Strickland in a middleweight fight. Strickland, of course, would go on to become the middleweight champion briefly by beating Israel Adesanya. UFC 281, he fights Adesanya. He wins and becomes the middleweight champion, KO 5 of Israel Adesanya. UFC 287, they had an immediate rematch. Adesanya actually KO'd Pereira and gets the championship back. Pereira then moves up to light heavyweight. He fights a non-title fight at UFC 291. He wins a decision over Jan Blachowicz. Then at UFC 295, he fights for the vacant title against Jiri Prochazka, a former champion, and he knocks Prochazka out in the second round. UFC 300, he defends against Jamal Hill, another former champion. He knocks Jamal Hill out in the first round. Then UFC 303 on Saturday, his rematch on 2 weeks' notice against Jiri Prochazka, and he knocks Prochazka out in the second round there. He crushed Prochazka at the end of the first round with a left hook, and the fight would have been over if there was even 7 seconds left in the round when Prochazka went down. But the left hook landed and dropped him right at the buzzer to end round 1. So the fight went into the second round. If you saw the fight, the highlight is all over the internet. If you look in my story on kevinioli.com, you will see the finish in there, the video of it. It was a kick to the head, 15 seconds into round number 2, and Alex Pereira then finishes Jiri Prochazka to retain his championship. So what do we do now? Do we sit here and say that Alex, who wants to fight at light heavyweight and would set an almost unmatchable record by going up and winning a championship, if he can do it, and there's no guarantee that he can, in a third weight class. But I think he has earned that right. I think by what he has done so far, by this whole list of champions that I mentioned he just fought, losing only to Adesanya in that group and beating all those others. I mean, he has done yeoman's work. It's all-time great stuff that he has done. Pereira's clearly putting himself onto the all-time great list, and he hasn't even been in the UFC for 3 years. It is remarkable, compelling, amazing stuff what he is doing. When he fights Jon Jones, I think he's going to find that Jon Jones is a totally different story. But think of the anticipation in that fight. You know, one of the reasons that I thought that the Ali Frazier fight back in March 8th, 1971 became so big was because you had Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, against Joe Frazier, the great slugger. And they were both undefeated. They both had a stake claim to the heavyweight championship. And now their styles are going to match, and they're going to fight to see who is the championship. Well, let's go to 2024, and let's compare Jon Jones against Alex Pereira. Pereira's moving up, and he's going to go after one of the greatest accomplishments of all time, becoming the first MMA fighter, the first UFC fighter, I should say, excuse me. There is an MMA fighter who has done this, but to become the first UFC fighter to hold championships in 3 different weight classes. He's won the middleweight championship, he's won the light heavyweight championship, and should he get a chance to fight Jon Jones for the heavyweight title, that would be his 3rd. I would favor Jones. Jones is this great wrestler who has become this unbelievable mixed martial artist. And Alex Pereira has never fought anybody that has that kind of wrestling and those other skills that Jon Jones has. And Jon Jones has that length and that timing about him, and he is so difficult. And I think that that would make him the favorite and probably the winner over Alex Pereira. But I think Pereira deserves the opportunity. It would be great for the fans to see this moment where you have a guy trying to set history against a guy who is considered the greatest of all time. And what would be the side bonus to that? If Pereira beats Jon Jones, he becomes #1 pound for pound. Not only does he then become the first fighter to hold championships in 3 weight classes, but he also becomes pound for pound #1 in the world, and he is going to be way up high on the all-time pound for pound list. So there would be so much at stake in a fight like that. That is why I think that that should be the next fight for Alex Pereira. But given that the UFC is committed to Stipe Miocic versus Jon Jones for the title in Madison Square Garden in November in New York, here's my suggestion. Why not put Alex Pereira on the undercard of the Madison Square Garden show and have him fight Magomed Ankalaev, who currently is #2. Ankalaev is a great grappler, has that wrestling. If Pereira then beats Ankalaev, he will have beaten 1, 2, 3, 4 in the current light heavyweight rankings. He will have faced that wrestler, and that would then set him up to fight Jon Jones, assuming Jones would be successful against Stipe Miocic. I think that makes a lot of sense. It would make that Madison Square Garden card unbelievably big, with Jones versus Miocic and Pereira versus Ankalaev as the chief support bout. I think that would be incredible, and that would be a way to set up a really fun 2025. But what Alex Pereira is doing in this sport is just beyond belief. The guy has incredibly heavy hands. He is developing as an overall mixed martial artist every day, and he is just a fun guy who is fun to watch. I agree Jon Jones is the greatest of all time, and when Jon Jones gets back in the octagon and fights, I most likely will have him #1 currently as well. But those are my explanations. What do you guys think? Please like this video. Please also subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it. And if you get a chance, go to keviniole.com, KEVINIOLE.com, and read my work over there. Appreciate everything.